Good evening. Welcome, everyone. My name is Megan Hoyer. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Public Engagement here at the Whitney. And it's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's conversation between Fran Lebowitz and Nick Mauss, which has been organized in conjunction with the exhibition Nick Mauss Transmissions on view on the 8th floor through tomorrow. So I hope most of you already know and have experienced Transmissions, which is a multidisciplinary work by Nick, exploring the relationship between modernist ballet and the avant-garde visual arts in New York from the 1930s through the 50s. I want to acknowledge my colleagues Scott Rothkopf and Elizabeth Sussman, co-curators of the exhibition, and Greta Hartenstein and Ali Tepper, who assisted them on the project. I also want to acknowledge all of the dancers, because I saw some of you walk in. I haven't met any of you, but I've been admiring you for the last however many weeks it's been. So I feel like I have to say that too. You guys are amazing. This is Nick's first solo exhibition in an American museum, and it embodies his hybrid mode of working that merges the roles of curator, artist, and scholar. At the Whitney, he brings together his own works alongside historical photographs, sculptures, paintings, drawings, film, and video from the Whitney's holdings and those of other public and private collections, all presented within his own layered exhibition design. And central to the show are daily performances that Nick has created with this incredible group of dancers. Or, as Alistair Macaulay wrote in the New York Times, and I just thought this was such a lovely encapsulation of the show, Transmissions is an installation, a collage of several art forms, a revisionist investigation of New York modernism and sexual expression, and an essay in queer theory. One of its binding threads is ballet, excitingly linked to the visual arts in a number of prestigious commissions. At its center are live dances, which hint at further links among art forms, history, and the present. Mr. Mauss is an investigator of lost time, and he's a presence in the way he arrays groups of items by artist. He evokes a climate, end quote. Although the explicit focus of Transmissions is on the decades around the Second World War, the show is equally a meditation on postmodernist questions about reception, repetition, and appropriation. Nick's interest in the historical materials he has brought together doesn't reside only in the past, but also in the unrealized presents and futures that these artists and their work might have and might still yet produce. I think that's why when I asked Nick who we should invite to speak about the ballet on the occasion of the exhibition, he said, in my memory, almost immediately, Fran Lebowitz. I am certain that she needs very little introduction to you all, and frankly, I wouldn't really know where to begin, and she also told me she'd correct me, so I'm going to keep it short. Give me material, I'll use it. As an author and cultural commentator, Fran Lebowitz has shaped the way we think about many things, perhaps first among them, New York. In 2010, Martin Scorsese made a film about her entitled Public Speaking, where she talks about her relationship with Jerome Robbins and thus with ballet. Given that Transmissions revolves around the social milieu of the dance world and the spectatorial dynamics of performance, I think Fran and Nick will have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to let them get to it. Please welcome Nick Mauss and Fran Lebowitz.
Hi.
Thank you, Megan, for that fantastic introduction. And Fran, thank you for being here on this gray Mother's Day. I've been hanging on your every word since I moved to New York, essentially, so it would be an understatement to say that I'm thrilled to be here with you. And
Thank you.
so obviously the historical framework of the exhibition I've made around modernist ballet as a cultural nexus in the 1930s through 1950s predates you. But I I began to feel as though the artistic achievements of this period cast long shadows forward. And what drew me to this period is not so much the time itself, but the way in which we are connected or disconnected from the ways of living that made this culture, and why. You have this incredible memory and an uncanny ability to zoom very far out and also to recount the most minute and crucial details. So when I was thinking about who could speak as a witness to New York in other guises, to other kinds of participation and spectatorship, commentary, criticism, and discourse, that stand apart from the situation we now find ourselves in. I thought immediately of you. And to begin, I'd love to hear about what first brought you to the ballet. I know that you liked to go see silent movies at MoMA as a kid. Did you also go to the ballet then, or did that happen later?
No, I mean, I went to the ballet, I suppose, a few times when I was a kid. I mean, it was, but when I first came to New York, the New York City Ballet was like the most important thing practically in New York. So sometimes people would bring me. It was expensive. I did not go on my own. And I went, I would say, not routinely, but I went. Because also, Nureyev was dancing. I mean, there's nothing happening now in New York that's so central because although New York is bigger than it was before because it now includes Brooklyn, the world of things like that people were interested in was in a way smaller. In other words, there were certain people interested in this stuff, not everybody. Museums, for instance, didn't really care how many people went to them. Something that, if I was in charge, I'd bring back. So no one really thought, how can we lure all these people with strollers into a museum? How can we bring all these people into museums who really don't care about being in museums? Restaurants. So the ballet, the people who went to the ballet all the time were not just fans of the ballet, they were literally fanatics, But also, I mean, a lot of things are almost accidental. I mean, you had Balanchine and Jerry at the same time. You had, for a period, Nureyev and Baryshnikov at the same time. None of those things would have happened without those people being at the same time. And that's just happenstance, I mean, we apparently don't have a moment like that now, but once I met Jerry, which, I don't really remember when I met him. I probably could figure it out if I tried, but it must have been, I would say, sometime in the early 80s. Then I went to ballet all the time. And I went practically every night. And I went with Jerry, which was very different from going with not Jerry, for instance. And I didn't just go to the ballet with Jerry. I also went to rehearsals and things like that. And so that, although I really liked the ballet before, I didn't really, my understanding of the ballet was incredibly enriched by my friendship with Jerry. I mean, incredibly. I mean, my appreciation of it was really one of the richest experiences of my life was knowing Jerry in this way. Also, to me, a very odd thing happened, which was that when Jerry was making glass pieces, which I don't remember when that was, but I'm sure someone could look it up on one of your modern devices, and by the time I finish this, you're going to tell me when it was.
1983.
1983, thank you. You didn't even need it here. So, when he was making it, he said to me one night, Jerry, one of the things that we had in common was constant, endless complaining. I mean, sometimes I couldn't even hear him complaining because I was complaining, and what Jerry always said was, I can't do this. It's going terribly, it's awful, it's horrible, I can't do it, I can't. And he was saying this about glass pieces, and then he said, and they had a date for it to open. I mean, which is the deadlines that choreographers have are different than deadlines writers have. Deadlines writers have, if it's not there, it's not there. There's not going to be people sitting in an audience waiting to see it. So he was very concerned about this. And he said, it would really help me if you would come to the rehearsal. And I said, how would that help you? He said, I want you to come because I can't do this. And could you just come? He tells me this one day. I said, well, I can't imagine how this would possibly help you because I don't really know how to choreograph. I know that I seem like a person who would, but in fact, I really don't know how to do it. And I said, what do you mean come to the rehearsal? I thought you haven't written it yet. And he said, what do you mean write it? I said, don't you write a ballet? So he said, how would you write a ballet? So I said, I thought there was some system, of notation, hieroglyphics, He said, no, you have to make it on the dancers. I was so shocked by this. This seemed to me like instantly the idea that writing was the worst thing in the world disappeared. Because I went to the rehearsal or whatever, and Jerry was not popular with the dancers, or in fact with most people. And so we were in the studio. There was the dancers, all of whom hated him, sitting there, glaring at him, and then he would try one thing after the other. And after the first one, we went to cross street to eat or something, and I said, "That's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life." That would be, to me, as if you were sitting at the desk and all of the words in the dictionary were sitting on the desk glaring at you. You know, because very often in my life, I'd looked at my dictionary, with my giant dictionary, and thought, all the words you need, Fran, are there. They're just in the wrong order. And that is true also of the dancers, except they're people. And they were like, and also then dancers smoked. So this studio was like, you couldn't even see. You know, everyone was like, glaring at him. Then he would try. Then if they didn't like it, you would see on their face like they didn't like it. So I said, I don't know how I can possibly help you with this. And I said, I don't even know what you're doing. So he said, here's how you can help me. You are the most judgmental person I've ever known in my entire life. And all I have to do is look at your face. And I said, except that, you know, my face expressing whatever I think about this really is not that knowledgeable. He said, it doesn't matter. It'll help me. So he did it. I don't know if you've ever seen Glass Pieces. We did a fantastic job. I mean, it's really good. Also, Jock was a principal dancer in that. And I don't think Jerry ever used him that way before. So that, I mean, I went to the opening of it, and it was fantastic. And I felt really that I contributed quite a bit. I don't know if that's what you asked me, but there's my answer.
I was curious about that, sort of what it is you thought that Jerry needed from you.
I guess, like, you know, I guess the same thing that my mother used to call that look on your face.
Right.
But I guess, you know, he profited from it. I have not.
What about the scene at the ballet? When you went to the ballet before knowing Jerome Robbins, or during, what was the audience like? What kind of a social space was it?
The audience for the New York City Ballet was an incredibly discerning, knowledgeable, critical audience. And it was an audience so, I mean, it seemed to me, I mean, I knew some of these people, some of them were friends of mine, and it seemed to me it was amazing they got anything else done. You know, and there was, this is what I'm going to say now is a quote, so I do not want to be killed for this, but there was a man named Herbert Muschamp. He's dead. He was for a long time the architecture critic at the Times. And at intermission, you would hear the audience talking about, say, Suzanne Farrell, who everyone was obsessed with. And they would be saying, like, I don't know, Suzanne she has a cold. Do you see that? I could tell that she went like that, you know, and she has a cold, and that is why when she was supposed to go like this, she went like this instead. No, she didn't go like this, she went like this, and it was like, they were just like completely obsessed with this. And I once said to Herbert, you know, it's like listening to, like, you know, men talk about like basketball statistics, you know, in 1921 Babe Ruth, he said, yes, he said, the ballet, it's baseball for fags. And in a way, that is true, although I did not say that, of course, but he said that. In fact, I said, I was always thinking of money-making schemes. I was always saying no to people offering me actual money, and then thinking of these money-making schemes that we never did and that could not have made money. I said to Herbert, let's make baseball cards with all the dancers on them. And then we would sell them to these, you know, 400 people who care about it. So the people were very obsessed with it, and my feeling was that the reason for it was that they so idolized this talent that the dancers had that they did not have. You know, that they felt if you were lucky enough to have this talent, which they thought of as the greatest talent you could have, and they were probably the last generation of people that understands what talent is, which is that you just have it, or you just don't. It doesn't matter how much your mother likes you, or tells you how great you are, or if you go to writing school, you either have it or you don't. And so they were so, you know, reverent about this talent that if they felt someone was misusing it, you know, or like getting a cold, they were very distraught by this. I think that this is a good thing. this kind of audience. Because I think that, although I did not know Suzanne Farrell, she certainly knew what this audience was like. And it could not do anything but make you better. If you know that everybody in the audience really understands what you're doing and really, understands how well it can be done, that if you're not doing it at the, peak of your ability, they will know it. And I did not go to the ballet after Jerry died for really a long time. I mean, at least a decade, maybe longer. And when I went the first time, I was just shocked how horrible it was. I was shocked. And one of the things that shocked me was the audience. The second the first dancer put their foot on the stage, applause. I mean, I am telling you that if Baryshnikov hung in the air for 15 minutes, there'd be like maybe, and when he came to Earth, it was like, he could do that for 18 minutes, but he was only there for 15 minutes, and so that they were constantly applauding. And afterward, I went backstage and I was talking to Sarah Mearns, who's a young dancer. She's a little older than she was then, but she's still young. And I said, now, of course, she never knew that other New York City Ballet, but I said, doesn't it bother you, this constant clapping and applause? And she said, well, we can't hear the music. Well, really, they can't hear the music, that's really a problem. And the audience applauding like this is every audience now. If you go to see a play, everything gets a standing ovation. Every single thing gets a standing ovation. So clearly, what is the audience applauding? Themselves. And where did they learn this? Oprah Winfrey. Okay? Now, I have nothing against Oprah Winfrey, but really, the New York City Ballet audience should not be copying Oprah Winfrey. And there's not going to be a car under your chair either at the New York City Ballet.
So this loss of a discerning audience, first, actually, I'd like to ask you then, were there people that you saw regularly at the ballet?
Yeah, they were the
or
regulars.
people that you met there?
Yeah, well, there were, I'm certain there weren't 100% the same people there every night, but there were a lot of the same people there every night. Because although, I was not that young in the 80s, I was in my 30s, but I don't think I realized it was a moment. I don't think I realized that it was going to end. The ballet, of course, is incredibly susceptible to human lifespan, because the ballets disappear. The people disappear, they die, and it disappears. It isn't like you can, now there certainly could be no one dancing who worked for Balanchine or who worked for Jerry. And so you lose these. They get literally lost, that would happen even if the entire audience didn't die all at once from AIDS, which is really what happened. Almost the entire audience died within not very many years, almost as if if you had bombed Lincoln Center, it would have had the same effect. And that is not just the ballet audience. That's the audience for a lot of other things too. And I really think that the loss of this audience has hurt everything. Of course, the loss of the artist is what everyone pays attention to. But these artists, of that era and of the eras before it would not have existed at the same level without that audience. So that it's just like now, people, you didn't have the same thing with writers, for instance. Unfortunately, many of them are still alive. But truthfully, the way people talk about books now, or talk about a book they read, it's idiotic. They literally don't know what they're talking about. Mainly because they learned to talk about this in school. This is not a thing you can learn. In school, there are things you can learn. I didn't learn many of them, but they're available to be learned. But there are things you cannot learn in school. So that, with films, for instance, obviously all the people die. Sometimes, I'm watching a movie and I realize every single person associated with this has been dead for 50 years. And it doesn't matter because the movie's still there. But the ballet, it disappeared. And other things like that too, the theater, the fact of Charles Ludlam dying, to me, was a tremendous difference in the theater in New York. Because although it would never have occurred to Charlie Ludlam or to anyone who ever saw those plays or to anyone who was ever in them, that there would be a time where you could actually have that kind of thing outside of that tiny group of people, no one could have imagined that if he had stayed alive, and all those people had stayed alive, then we would have that instead of the junk that pretends to be that.
Right. I was talking to the artist Elaine Rychek the other day, and she said, in the 70s, we would go to the ballet, we would go see the Theater of the Ridiculous, we would go to see Downtown Dance, the movies, and go to the disco. All these things were
Every
sort of
single
part
night,
of...
all the time. That's what we did. We
Yeah.
did that all the time, and had sex with 5 million people.
Right.
So, and how did we have all this time? No one was making money. I mean, no one thought about money. No one ever talked about money. I mean, other than the way that I still think about money, which is the way a child does. Like, do I have enough money? And to me, there was such a thing as enough money. See, that's the problem. I mean, to me, enough money meant, can I pay my rent? And the second I would acquire enough money to pay my rent, I stopped working for that month. Because why would you keep working? Why would you keep working when you didn't need any more money? And the amount of money that I thought I needed was literally like $120. And it wasn't like I had other things. I just thought, who wants, here's what you trade for money, time. So even when I was young, and I mean, there's no bigger time waster than me, let me assure you, my idea of I'm allowed to waste my time. Not someone's allowed to waste my time just because they're giving me money. But now people have to make money all the time and talk about money all the time, and it interferes with, life.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of life. I mean, for me, I know this sounds like a crazy thing, but I mean, I hate money. Unfortunately, I love things. This is a horrible combination. It's okay if you hate money and you're a Buddhist monk, okay? I am not, okay? So that, we did all the time go to the ballet if we could. I mean, it was expensive to go to the ballet, so someone had to take you to the ballet. The upside, of course, of being young is that you're cute. People take you places. So that there would be two kinds of people at the ballet, people who had money, and then all the cute people who were being taken there. I met Ellsworth Kelly at the ballet because it was during intermission, and this man came over to me. I didn't know what he looked like. It wasn't like now, where everyone knows what everyone looks like because they look you up on the internet or whatever. But this man came over to me and said, I just want to introduce myself to you because I see you here all the time. He was there all the time. I mean, I recognized him just from being there, and that's the guy I see here all the time. And he said, I'm really a fan of yours. I'm Ellsworth Kelly. And I said, I'm a fan of yours. And he said, I thought you would be. Same thing. If you went to see the Theater of the Ridiculous, it was same people all the time. People went to see John Vaccaro all the time. People went to see even much more ramshackle things than that. Because Charlie Ludlam was much more organized, than most of those people. Yeah, we went to the movies all the time. We went to the movies all the time. I mean, we went to the Elgin, which is now the Joyce, which I recently said to someone, I'll meet you near the Elgin, and they said, the what? It hasn't been the Elgin for 35 years, but in my mind it's still the Elgin. It's the Joyce Theater now. The stuff was better when it was the Elgin. So the Elgin was a movie theater, and it was literally falling apart. It was dangerous to sit in those seats. They were pieces of steel sticking up, and they had all the movies that we wanted to see. Terrible prints. The prints always broke in the middle of it. We would go to the Elgin. The Elgin, for a period, had movies all night. So Max's would close at 4 o'clock. We would go to the Elgin. We would stay there till 10 in the morning. At 10 in the morning, the Museum of Modern Art started showing movies. So we would go uptown to Museum of Modern Art, and we did this all the time, because we could. Why wouldn't you do this? I mean, also, the people who were making movies then, I'm not talking about just old movies, which I did love old movies, and we went to see the Theater at St. Mark's had these old movies, and most of the movies we saw were in terrible physical condition, so that the idea that a movie would routinely break in the middle of the thing, and everyone would sit there waiting for it to. The Museum of Modern Art, the movies didn't break. That was the other thing. Well, let's go to the Museum of Modern Art because the movie's not going to break in the middle of it. Also, by the way, it was very cheap to go to the Museum of Modern Art. It didn't cost, however much it costs now, $40, some crazy amount of money. And the museums were empty, by which I mean the only people in the museums were people who like museums. There aren't that many people who like museums. You may think that there are a lot because you see these big lines and stuff like that, but so you could just walk in.
No.
When I was young, if I was uptown and I had like 45 minutes between two things I had to do uptown, I would just go to the Museum of Modern Art. Because you could just go there for 45 minutes and you could just look at, say, one painting. Because they had like a lot of paintings and stuff there. Then not just a lot of restaurants. So that is true. When I say we, I mean all the people that I know and people like me, we did that all the time. That's one of the reasons we moved to New York. That was the reason we moved to New York, because in other places they didn't have this stuff. That's why.
But that, what you're talking about describes a really different, as an audience, it was probably a smaller group of people, but who really had a wide range of passions and sort of moved through many different worlds. Now it does seem that people are really much more compartmentalized and have a kind of narrow field that they like to move in.
But also a different kind of person comes to New York now. So, most of these people, lived in New York because they weren't allowed to live anywhere else. You came to New York because, you could live here, and now people, especially gay people, they can live anywhere. There are gay people who are like born in St. Louis, they stay there. They stay there, they get married, they have children. So that's why people came here, and so, there was a, I don't know what the word is. Camaraderie is really too sweet a word to describe it. But that was your connection to these people, even if, you didn't like most of them, of course. And some, there were different groups of people, of course, all of whom hated each other. Human nature is always the same, bad. But it is true that everyone was interested in everyone I knew was interested in all this stuff. And if someone would tell you about something, you should go see, this thing, it would be in, like someone's apartment, what is that? They would tell you, oh, this guy, he makes puppets. Oh yeah, let's go see that. Every single thing sounded good, even if it wasn't good. And most of it was bad, because most things are bad. Most of these people were not Charlie Ludlam, who was immensely talented. Most of them were not. They were they thought they were like Charlie Ludlam, but they were not, because he was very talented and they were not. But they were very interested in the same thing, No, it's not like that anymore, also because it didn't cost us $1 million to live here.
Yeah.
When I was young, some of the people I knew had money. I didn't really realize that. I never really thought about it, But people who did have money, meaning their parents or their family had money, it was not really a very stylish thing to have money. So they pretended they didn't. And so that we mostly didn't go to each other's apartments unless you had sex with them. So we mostly lived in public, and so we mostly didn't go to each other's apartments. So I didn't really know, whether people had money or not. Some people had to work, like me. Not everybody drove a taxi, or was a waitress or whatever. But we weren't really very interested in that part of people's lives. And so, I wasn't like, I had a girlfriend when I was young who lived on Beekman Place. I never thought, how do you live on Beekman Place? Until I realized she was a hooker. Well, let me say, a very expensive call girl. And someone said, how could you not realize that? She lived on Beekman Place, which was a place to me where like Fred Astaire lived. Even now, if you go to Beekman Place, it looks like you're going to see Fred Astaire tapping down the street. But we weren't really even curious about that, and so that was, interestingly enough, actual currency, had no currency. It didn't have any currency. It carried no status among the people I know at all. And so now there are no competing values to money at all. None. And so, of course, things are different. Even if these people had not died, it would still be different. Although it's hard for me to imagine that just there not being AIDS and having all these talented people alive, I don't think would have kept capitalism from devouring democracy. I don't think that would have happened.
Right. But still, what you've said about sudden eradication of all these talented people and their audience, I grew up in Germany, so I know what it's like to be in a culture that punched a hole in itself and doesn't understand why the hole won't fill up again.
I could tell you.
You know, this, the way you framed it, was such a revelation to me in terms of, why is there no connection to this, to some of the things that are in this exhibition, for example, to a certain kind of camp or, a sophistication and wit and this arch sensibility.
It was actually broken, but I mean, a generation was lost, so it was broken just the way that could even happen in a family, like happens, say, in your native land. So that if a whole generation of people dies, then that connection is broken, and so, the kind of thing you're talking about, which relied completely on kind of a voluntary passing down of something, because it wasn't a family, okay? It's not a family. It's, people are saying, this is my family. It's not your family. Your family is your family, okay? The difference between the people you say are your family, these are my family, they're my friends, but they're really my family, no. Your family is your family. That's the bad news about families. Like, these people you say are your family, they're your friends, okay? The difference is you chose them. So that that was broken. So that when you asked me, when I went through the exhibition with you, did I remember or think that, say, Peter Hujar was aware of George Platt lines? Of course he was. We talked about this kind of stuff. But people would teach you. The older people taught the younger people. I mean, but literally, like, you have to read this? No. Did you ever hear this? But someone would say to me, "Did you ever, read this?" No. You never heard of this? No. Why not? I lived in Morristown, New Jersey. That's why I never heard of it. But then I came here, and I heard this person say it, and I heard of it, and then I got the book, and then I went to see the thing, and it was passed on, to people. Just the same way, like, you have in your exhibition that calling card that Lincoln Kirstein
Diaghilev's calling card.
And you told me that I think Anne Bassano did, and she lent it to the thing. And I said to you, and this is true, the fact that the present way of life of gay people, like where you get married and have children and stuff like that, this would have been very bad for these people. And it would have been very bad for the world, because otherwise, say, Lincoln Kirstein, say he had children. When he died, his children would inherit all this stuff and sold it. Okay? Museums and libraries are filled with the estates of gay people. The really important estates of gay people, drawings, manuscripts, all these things were given to libraries and universities and museums because there were no children to take them and sell them. So think about this before you make a bad decision.
We were just talking in the green room. I mentioned that I had noticed a David Wojnarowicz photo on the wall of a friend's apartment who told me they'd found it in the garbage in the late 80s. It must have belonged to somebody who had died, and all their worldly belongings were thrown out on the sidewalk. And you had something interesting to say about actually sort of the number of things that just vanished in addition to...
Right, these things were lost because, I mean, David's photograph was probably not... did not have a high monetary value when you were a friend, when it was thrown in the street. But what happened was, when people in New York died of AIDS, it might be the first time that their family had any, had seen them, or maybe had not seen them. In other words, when people, one thing is AIDS is what it outed people. You couldn't pretend you weren't dying, or, but sometimes the families would come here after someone died. They would go into the apartment of the person who died, who perhaps they had not spoken to for 10 years, and they would throw their stuff out. Okay, and so to a person like that, say you were someone who had not spoken to your son or your brother or whatever for 10 years because he was gay and he'd been thrown out of the house, that kind of thing, like a David Wojnarowicz photograph, would have been thrown into the street. And so, that happened a lot. I mean, with all kinds of things, with books, with photographs, with, all that kind of stuff that people had. Your friend, whoever owned it when it was thrown in the street, might have been a friend of David's, maybe was given by David. And that's happened to a lot of that stuff. It got thrown away. And it got, there were, right after the first wave of AIDS, for instance, my first book had a very tiny first printing. It had printing of 6,000. And it was almost entirely bought by gay people because I was only known to people who would interview them, which were only gay people. So initially, after that book became successful, those first edition copies were very expensive. I wanted some, I couldn't buy them. They were too expensive for me. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but at a certain point, they start turning up. You know, by the dozens and dozens and dozens, because they were in these people apartments, and the families came in and they sent them to the Strand, and so they became much more inexpensive for a time. That's one of the reasons I knew about this, you know. But I do know that happened. You know, that happened with a lot of things. You know, it happened also that the person would disappear, another person died, and their friends or even maybe the people that are very close to them had no access to their things, even though they may have been shared things, because the family just came in and took it. I mean, the family was there because they were hoping there would be something valuable, you know, like a television set.
Right. But the other really interesting implication of, you know, once you really let it sink in, that the loss of the audience is so significant, because it points to things that are not tangible. You know, the loss of knowledge, and a certain kind of sophistication or interest or the passion that you spoke about earlier. I mean, that really seems to be the greatest loss, and the reason why I think for people of my generation, there is no sense of really a continuous history. We have these kind of false markers of, say Stonewall and AIDS as sort of the beginning, but the connection to anything that happened before that is very difficult to locate.
But also, it's, you can't make people who are young understand what it was like to be gay then. No. Okay, so I mean, here's this. The loss of this culture, that is the downside of freedom. I mean, the personal freedom that you have that we did not have. I mean, that culture was a culture of marginalization. People say oppression. I think that's too strong a word. I mean, I think it's, and I lived in it, but I mean, I think it is, I think it's terrible to equate that, for instance, with slavery. I mean, it wasn't that bad. I mean, in fact, it was pretty fun, which you never hear slavery being called fun. So, so that I feel that, if, you have the situation you have now, which is gay people with children, which it just seems ridiculous to me, but, I mean, it's like when I was young, there were two upsides to being gay. You didn't have to go in the army, and you didn't have to get married. The first two things that gay rights activists fought for were gays in the military and gay marriage. The two most confining institutions in the world. This is what they most wanted. I mean, really? You want to go in the army? I mean, this just struck me as bizarre. So now people I see, they get married. I guess they go in the army. I mean, I thought at first, this whole thing of gays in the military was so shocking to me because I was of the generation of, had I been a boy, would have gone to Vietnam. Okay? That was a way to get out of going to Vietnam, by the way. Someone I know, a very rich man, who gave a lot of money to the campaign for gays in the military, I said, how did you stay out of Vietnam? And he said, I told him I was gay. Okay, now most people didn't do that, by the way, because you then could never get a job. If you were officially gay, which you would be if that was your reason for not going to Vietnam. But this guy didn't have a job. He wasn't that kind. I mean, he had a different kind of profession. Getting married? I mean, it seems to me now that I don't even understand. I'm so surprised that gay people want to get married. I mean, when that first started, I remember saying, haven't you ever met anyone who was married? I mean, you've seen marriage, right? I mean, it's not going to be that different. It's going to be the same. But so you have that, okay? So of course you have gay marriage and you have children, and you have children. What could be more distracting? What could be less likely to result in, say, the theater of the ridiculous, all right? Or West Side Story. Or, I mean, these things are what you had instead of children. I mean, to me, this doesn't seem like much of a contest. I mean, it's not like there aren't enough people in the world. I mean, everyone acts like the biggest problem we have is there are too few people. So we have to keep thinking of more and more ways to have children. Oh, you're a woman, you're 60? No, we can fix that. No. Okay? So, I don't know what you asked, but there's my answer. Yes, it's gone. It's lost. It's not coming back. That is true. And it's probably very hard for people to understand, like someone young, to understand the feeling that you had, you know, from a feeling of recognition from looking at certain things, you know, from I mean, this is one of the ways that certain things get into the popular culture, is that people don't know where they came from. You know, I mean, so that, you know, for instance, like Madonna, you know, did all that voguing stuff, you know. The people who liked Madonna, and there were many of them, although I personally knew none, the people like Madonna, they didn't know where that came from. They thought she invented it, you know, which is... And now, on a higher level, the same thing happened with Susan Sontag. You know, I mean, Susan wrote all these, you know, things, and all the people in France thought she was just promoting their ideas, and everyone in the United States thought they were her ideas. And she knew that. So, you know, that's what happens when people don't realize where something comes from. You know, so that, you know, you look at the photographs that you have, the George Pletlin's photographs, and no one has to think, do you think Robert Mapplethorpe ever saw these? Yeah, I do. I think he saw these. You know, I saw I went to see the caves at Lascaux, and my first thought was, when did Picasso see these? You know, so that, you know, even someone like Picasso, a far cry from Robert Mapplethorpe, it comes from somewhere. It doesn't just come out of the blue, you know. And it's... Now, people can see everything, you know, not me, because I don't have these machines, but everyone else has them, and you can see every single thing in the world. But you see it all at once. You know, so if you see it all at once, it has no linear quality, you know, so that for me, the things that I know, which is not everything, close, but I at least know them in order. I think it's so important to know things in order. It doesn't seem to be at all an interest anymore in people to know what came before this or what came before that. It's, to me, it's centrally imperative that you know what order things came in. I think one of the great things about your exhibit is that, in a way, if you can pay attention to it, I mean, because like when I first saw it with you, there weren't that many kids here as there were today. But it shows you where it came from. I mean, it's very... electrifying to me to see where things came from. You know, it's really important that people know this. And it's certainly, you know, not just important for artists, of course, but I mean, when people don't know this, I don't know what they're seeing when they look at this stuff. You know, they don't know what they're seeing. So if you don't know what you're seeing, what is the point of seeing it? So they don't have to keep these museums so crowded.
But it's...
Stay home.
What you're talking about is also a question of context. You know, does the context exist?
It's totally about context.
Yeah.
There's no context for this.
Yeah.
If you don't have a context for it, you know, that is the thing that, for instance, you know, like Marty Scorsese, when he was making the movie with me, about me, or whatever you want to call it, Marty knows every single frame of every single movie ever made. That sounds impossible, but let me assure you that I was once talking to Marty about something personal in my life. And he looked at me and he goes, you know what that's like, Fran? That's exactly like, you know, the fifth scene in the second reel of this Buster Keaton movie made in 1901, the silent movie. He said, where he's looking in the candy store window, trying to decide what candy to buy his girlfriend. It's just like that. And I said, no, Marty, I don't know the second scene of the third reel, and no one knows this. So he said, I'm going to run it for you. And he ran it for me. And it was exactly like the third scene of the second reel of the... I mean, this is not just stuff that's in his head. This is so resonant for Marty. And, I'm telling him something that was happening to me in my actual life, and he however Marty's mind works, which is not how mine works, he goes through everything, and here it is. Mm-hmm. It's in that Buster Keaton movie, made, 100 years ago. He knows these things. He knows them in order. Okay? And so it's very rich to go to the movies with Marty. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly enriching experience to go to the movies with Marty. And if you say to Marty, I don't like this movie, that he thinks is a great movie, you're wrong. I'm going to run it for you again. And then he runs it for you again, and then you realize you're wrong. And believe me, I'm wrong. It's not something I like to say very often. Mm-hmm. It was bad enough I had to say it on election night, and I don't ever expect to have to say it so horribly again. And Jerry was like that, with the ballet, although you can't know the ballet in that way, mm-hmm. the same way. And also because Jerry was unable to see things that happened before. There's so little film. Yeah. In the ballet. Yeah. I had recommended to you that you see this movie about Tanya Balanchine, mm-hmm. Just because there's some film of her dancing. Yeah. There's no other way. Hardly anyone ever saw her dance. She only danced. She danced for like 5 minutes, mm-hmm. And so, that movie is very valuable, I think, because there's some film of her dancing, even though there's very little film of dance, period. And it's a horrible way to see dance, by the way. It's, even if there was great film of dance, it's really not seeing it at all. It's like looking at pictures of architecture. Right. It has nothing really to do with what you're seeing. Right. But it was at least some chance to see it, especially since every single person had always described her to me as the greatest dancer ever. I had asked Jerry once, who was the greatest female dancer you ever saw? And he said, Tanya Balanchine. Mm-hmm. And she only danced for 5 minutes. And Jerry saw a lot of dancers, he said it like that, without even 1 second.
Did he say why?
If he did, I don't recall. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. He was very devoted to her. I knew her because of him. Yeah. He was extremely devoted to her. But she really danced very briefly. Yeah. Everyone who saw her said the same thing, mm-hmm. but not everyone is Jerry. Mm-hmm. And also Jerry was not, filled with praise for people. So that's why I asked him, who was the greatest female dancer you ever saw, knowing he had seen many great female dancers and worked with many great female dancers. He said it like that, so which is also part of the reason why it was such an exceptional tragedy that she, got polio. And I asked him too, who was the greatest male dancer, and he said like that, Baryshnikov. Mm-hmm. When Baryshnikov was dancing and Nureyev was dancing, there were camps, no pun intended, as to who was the better dancer. Mm-hmm. Baryshnikov was clearly the better dancer. He was not, however, the beauty that Nureyev was. Mm-hmm. He was so beautiful, Nureyev. He was just like an astounding, physical presence. And a great dancer, Mm-hmm. But there was like really warring factions. If those people are still alive, they'd still be fighting over it, believe me. There were really, I've witnessed many, many really brutal verbal confrontations. But confrontations about, Baryshnikov and Nureyev were among the bloodiest I ever saw.
When you were watching glass pieces being made, was there any way you felt that you could get inside of his head? I never understood what he was doing. Yeah. I really tried. It's like, it's a language that either you have or you don't. I have more ability to discern in some way, having seen when it was finished to see it, understood more what he was doing, mm-hmm. In retrospect. But no, I have no, it's like, I am monolingual, I speak no other languages. And yet, I have been in places where, for instance, in Los Angeles, in many of the hotels in Los Angeles, they have 7 or 8 or more stations on the television that are in Arabic, that are Arabic stations because of who owns the hotels. I once realized that I was sitting on the edge of my bed in a hotel room, 6 inches from the TV, my whole face crinkled up, where I was trying to read The Crawl on Al Jazeera, which is in Arabic. And I suddenly, I felt my face all scrunched up, and I realized, Fran, no matter how much you're concentrating on this, you will not be able to read this because you do not read Arabic, okay? It absolutely was unavailable to me. I don't know how to read it. I don't even recognize it, really. I can vaguely recognize it. I would say I have a little more access to, the language of a choreographer, but not much more. But in retrospect, I could. When I watched him do it, and then I saw
But while he was doing it, no. But the dancers do. You know, that's the interesting thing to me. I mean, the dancers do, which is, I mean, I noticed that while they were making this, that, you know, I mean, and the dancers do, even though they're not choreographers. I mean, some dancers become choreographers, but they understand it, you know, in a way that, you know, because they speak English. I mean, it's, you know, they speak that language.
Right.
You know, I mean, they also know what he's asking of them. You know, it's like, I don't know. Like, you know, something has to be pretty, something has to be pretty extraordinary to me in ballet for me to see how extraordinary it is. But every little thing they do is very painful physically. It's hard to do, and they know how hard it is. Like, if he would tell them to do this, you know, and I would see them go like this, I would first think like they thought it was a bad idea. It wasn't that they thought it was a bad idea, although they may have. It was they knew it was hard, that it was going to be hard to do. You know, to me, I can't do any of it, so of course it would be hard to do, you know, but they knew the difference.
Besides Tanaquil-Leclerc, what do you think would have been something like a muse for Jerome Robbins? Or how much did an idea like that come into play, not just with him, but with artists you knew?
I don't know. I mean, I know that, you know, unlike most people, I had very little interest in Jerry's non-ballet career, you know, because people always used to ask me about West Side Story and all this kind of stuff, and I realized that I had never asked him a single thing about it. I loathe musicals. I mean, West Side Story is better than most all musicals. The movie, I had seen the movie, I never saw the play. And so I asked him about it, and he talked a lot about it. You know, he had a very close relationship with Leonard Bernstein, who I think did, you know, inspire him, influence him. I think that was his, you know, for West Side Story, that was the close relationship that, you know, that they thought of it kind of together in a way. Stephen Sondheim, you know, who did the lyrics, but was younger. Like, he was like the kid they were given this, you know, chance to. So that I think music was very important to Jerry. I mean, and, you know, I also do not understand music. I like music, but I don't understand music. Because the kind of understanding that musicians have of music, I know, is something like math. I don't know what it's like math, but it's like math. I know it's like math. I've told this to many musicians. And I always say, I don't really understand music. And they always say, it doesn't matter. You know, it must matter because other people do understand it this way, but I'm not one of them. So that I know that I think Leonard Bernstein was important to Jerry in that way. I think other dancers were. You know, he didn't have the best personal relationship with Balanchine, as far as I could tell. I did not know, I mean, I met him, but I didn't really know Balanchine. I think dancers more. Jerry started as a dancer. Jerry still always looked like a dancer. Like, the weird thing about Jerry was that his hair turned white at a young age, and he lost his hair at a fairly young age. So that, in a certain way, if you look at old pictures of Jerry, he looked old when he was young. But Jerry had a house on the beach, and I was walking on the beach one day behind Jerry, who was quite a bit ahead of me, and I was with this girl, and I said, look at Jerry. I mean, he was in a bathing suit. You know, he was well into his 60s. He looks like a kid from the back. He walked like a dancer. You know, he just, you know, he always walked like that. He always retained the way that, you know, dancers, they sit a certain way, they stand a certain way. They are different beings from us. They are completely different beings. And Jerry, who was not a dancer for very long, you know, still always moved like that, walked like that. In his house, the top floor of his house was a ballet studio. He had a bar, and he did that every day. I never saw him do it, but I mean, he did that every day. And so, you know, I think that being able to do, you know, I mean, dance is different, say, from writing. I mean, so being able to do that and doing that, that must be a connection to someone else who can do that, you know, and not only can do it, but also lives through it. You know, I mean, it is the most, like, grueling, horrible way of life you could imagine. You know, I mean, when I was around those dead children with Jerry, I mean, I just thought, like, how could they stand to do this? You know, it's just too much discipline. It's an incredible amount of Jock Soto, for instance. Poor Jock, I really felt sorry for, because Jock was one of those people who could never eat. Like, if Jock ate a strawberry, he gained like 10 pounds. And to eat dinner with Jock Soto was to witness the worst misery. He would sit there like, you know, and I mean, he was not built like a usual. I mean, dancers usually aren't built the way Jock was built, which is kind of squarely built, and you know, and he just couldn't eat, and he was just constantly in a state of misery. I mean, real misery. And by the way, he loved to cook. You know, he was more interested in food than most dancers. You know, and I just always thought the second Jock stops dancing, he's going to weigh 300 pounds. He doesn't, but I mean, so that, you know, none of them can eat. So not just Jock, but, you know, he just had this horrible metabolism where he couldn't eat anything. But also in those days, they could smoke. Now, I have no idea what they do. Because they don't smoke, I don't think, or you certainly can't smoke there. I mean, they should, like, let them smoke. Because they don't let them eat. You know, I mean, they are human. They have to do something. You know, it's a very, very rigorous way of life. People always compare it to athletes, but it's much. I mean, I don't really know any athletes, but it has to be worse than being an athlete, harder, because they don't, it's not just the physical aspect like athletes. There's another aspect to it that they also have to have, which, you know, is less common than athletic ability. So, you know, I know that tons of people are always trying out for the New York City Ballet. You know, to me, I think so much you tell them first, you understand what this is, right? It's this life of endless deprivation, and then it ends early. Okay? And then you have no skills to do anything else. So it's really a religion. I mean, I think of it more as a religion than I do as any kind of artistic practice. It's a really religion. You have to believe in it, you have to adhere to it, and you have to give up your life for it. And so I'm glad they do, but I'm glad that I don't have these abilities, so I didn't have to make this decision.
When did you stop going to the ballet, or as frequently as you had?
I stopped going to the ballet, you know, I mean, well, like, Balanchine died. Well, Heather stopped dancing. I went to Heather Watts danced for a long time. I mean, I think she was 40 when she stopped dancing. That was unusual then. It might be more common now because everyone, as certain people, like people my age, have gotten old, we've decided we change the rules. Oh, 40, that's nothing to dance. Oh, 50, be a football player. You know, because it makes us seem younger, but it's a lie. Okay? So, I mean, I didn't say any of these things, but, so I know that Heather did dance till 40, you know, and, you know, Heather was a fantastic dancer. You can dance till you're 40, but you're not the same dancer you were when you were 30. I mean, I don't have to be a dancer to know this. You know, I'm not the same walker I used to be. You know, I mean, it's a different kind of body, but it's still the human body. So that, you know, as I said, when Balanchine and Jerry, you know, died and they weren't there anymore, the dances were being taught by people that maybe had danced for them, you know. But it's just like erasing, like a chalk drawing. It just gets more and more erased, you know. And so that, you know, it becomes further and further, or like a copy that just becomes fainter and fainter and fainter, you know. And then at a certain point, there's no one to even remember, no, this used to be, you know, it used to look completely different, you know. So, I mean, I know I saw Damien. I saw Damien dance. In fact, I saw his last performance, and he danced longer. But I also remember seeing Damien dance within the last year he danced, and I saw him do something that I was so shocked. And I thought that, you know, I'm not saying that he didn't have, just talked about it with him afterward. I'm not saying I understood why he did it, but it's not something that I could imagine that would have been put up with in a way. He was dancing, and I guess I didn't notice this because of my lack of understanding of music, but I guess that Damien thought, and undoubtedly he was correct, that the orchestra was too slow. And it must have been like really interfering with his dancing. I mean, I didn't notice this. And all of a sudden he went to the front of the stage and he went like this to the orchestra. I was like so shocked, you know, that he like broke that thing where he was like, he was in such a fury. I never forgot that. And I don't think he would have done that if Balanchine was alive. I mean, I don't think he would have felt free to. I mean, I could be wrong. You could ask him. He's now the head of Juilliard. But I never asked him after that. But I'm telling you that I was flabbergasted to see a dancer do that. And I think I did talk to him afterwards. He said they were too slow. Couldn't you hear it? No, I didn't hear they were too slow. You know, but, you know, I'm sure that isn't the first time that ever happened in the history of dance, you know. But it's certainly the first time a dancer ever, like, yelled at the orchestra like that, like, come on, come on.
Do you think then that these dances look best or have, sort of their true quality if they're performed by the dancers they were made for by the choreographer?
Yes, I think that's true. The thing is, I know there's a lot of other choreographers now. There are some very good choreographers. They're not Balanchine. Balanchine is a once-in-a-century talent. Jerry always complained about Balanchine. He felt that if there was not a Balanchine, he would be recognized as a greater genius. And that is true. That was absolutely true because Balanchine was a greater genius. That's bad luck for Jerry, okay? But there were many very good artists around Picasso, but they weren't Picasso. Bad luck for you. Balanchine was the level of talent of Picasso, in my opinion. If you happen to be contemporary of a person like that and you do the same thing, bad luck for you. But good luck for everyone else. Really good luck for us that there was Balanchine. Good luck for us that there was Jerry at the same time. They were very different. People say you can't say one artist better than another. Yes, you can. Of course you can. It's a ludicrous thing to say you can't say one artist is better than another. I can. In fact, I do. You may not say it if you don't want to, but it doesn't make it true. Jerry was incredibly talented. He was the Balanchine of Broadway choreography, and truthfully, that sensibility Jerry had, which was, a million times different, more cultivated than a regular Broadway choreographer. There are people, I personally hate to go and see a Broadway musical except Hamilton. But, it changes the level of it, forever almost, if you have someone like that there. Even if they didn't see, the thing. West Side Story, the movie, it's fantastic to see that. But then you also have to know he was fired. Jerry was fired. In their own era, Jerry was fired from directing the movie West Side Story. Fired.
Why was that?
By a producer who you never heard of because he's a producer, but he was in charge. He fired him. I'm sure because he was impossible to work with Jerry. I'm sure for the same reason that a lot of people didn't like Jerry. When it was the 10th anniversary of Jerry's death, the New York City Ballet, someone called me from there and said they have these things which they didn't used to have, which is they give like a little extra things to people who like give money to the ballet or something. So one of the things they maybe have people talking about, the ballet or dancers talking to them or, we just can't do enough for rich people in New York. So that, their lives are just not rich enough. We have to go there and explain things to them, give them extra things. Would I, talk, I can't remember to whom, to someone from the ballet about Jerry. And it was something really very kind of specific about dance. So I said, I'm not really qualified to talk about that. Why don't you? I named some people. Well, they're not available. And then I finally said to this person, I said, they're not available. Here's your problem. You can't find anyone who liked Jerry. That's it. Your problem is you can't find anyone who liked Jerry. They're still mad at him 10 years later. So I'm not mad at him because I wasn't a dancer. So that's why you want me. So, I think that's why, Jerry was fired from West Side Story. Even though he choreographed, that. I recently saw the movie West Side Story. And I remember Jerry telling me that it was lucky for them that, they were knocking down that whole neighborhood to build Lincoln Center. And so it is really filmed there in the streets, which were empty because they had thrown all these people out. They threw out hundreds of thousands of people from their apartments, by the way, something you're never going to read about, to build this mall of culture. So that, which I didn't like the first one, I don't like this one. But it made a fantastic set for the movie West Side Story. So he did choreograph all that, and it is a fantastic, it's fantastic for a movie. But Jerry was so, when they were rehearsing the play, the Broadway play West Side Story, Jerry told me, when I knew him, that he wouldn't let everyone who worked on that, and there's still many people alive who worked on that, will tell you how horrible it was. Because one of the things that Jerry insisted on was that the people who were in the Sharks, and the people who were in, I forget what the other...
The Jets,
that they actually hate each other in real life. It was important. So they weren't allowed to like talk to each other or eat lunch with each other or in any way have any feeling other than hatred. And so they did. And so obviously that was not exactly a pleasant experience for them, because he thought that if they didn't really hate each other, it wouldn't be that good.
Right.
And he probably was right. Okay, so here's the thing, I mean, West Side Story lasts, and chorus boys, there's always no ones. I guess that was his idea. I mean, I have heard people talk about that who were in West Side Story, and it was incredibly upsetting to them. But I don't know, but I mean, it's worth it to moviegoers. Mm-hmm. There are more moviegoers than there are people in a movie. Democracy.
I found this really interesting quote. This is a bit of a jump aside, but I wanted to hear your reaction to this, which was at a conference in 1949 called the Western Roundtable on Modern Art.
I'm not that old.
I know. Still. Frank Lloyd Wright is wondering out loud, quote, if this movement we call modern art and painting has been greatly or is greatly in debt to homosexualism. Duchamp responds, I believe that the homosexual public has shown more interest or curiosity for modern art than the heterosexual. And so, especially the kind of, in one of our earlier conversations you talked about, you moved to New York, the people you knew them because they were gay. You had to be kind of covert about it, but those were the people you knew that you gravitated towards. And they were also the people that you shared interests with.
You knew people just because they were gay, was the point I was trying to make to you. In other words, I mean, the same way that I know people now just because they smoke. So that actually, homosexuality and cigarette smoking have changed places completely. They've just traded places. When I was young, if you told me when I was like 13 years old that the thing that would give me the most trouble in my adult life was cigarette smoking, I would have thought you were crazy. So that, when I was young, you could smoke everywhere, but you couldn't be gay anywhere. Okay, now you can be gay anywhere, St. Louis, Atlanta, but you can't smoke anywhere. So, I know people now just because I know them from standing outside of restaurants smoking. That is how I know them. The same way I knew people when I was young just because we were gay. That is why I knew them. So that most of the people that I knew because we were gay were like me, by which I mean they were writers or artists or whatever. But what I was explaining to you was that I knew this man who was a very eminent scientist. And he was a friend of Jerry's. He was more the age of Jerry than my age. He was elected to, I forget what exactly it's called, the American Academy of Science or something like that, which is kind of like the French Academy. There's only like 40 people, someone has to die. So he was elected to this, and they gave him like this medal and a ribbon. And I said to him, David, why don't you wear this? And he said, I would never wear that. He was a very kind of like, conservative guy. So I said, well, give it to me, I'll wear it. So one of the things is a ribbon. It's like a little ribbon that you put in your lapel, which I wear all the time when I wear like a dinner jacket. And I once wore it to some benefit for some disease, some illness or something. And I was in the elevator with a lot of doctors and scientists who were there like talking to people to get them to give money to cure this illness, which they never cure any illnesses, you may have noticed. And one of these men looked at me, and he looked at my lapel, and he said, aren't you Fran Lebowitz, the writer? I can't tell you like the contempt. The writer? So I said, yes. He said, where'd you get that? Because he recognized it. Mm-hmm. So I said, oh, a friend of mine got this, and he gave it to me because he didn't want to wear it. What friend? So I tell him the guy's name, and he goes, how would you know him? So I couldn't tell him because he's gay. That's how I know him. You're right. I would never know this guy otherwise. Not in a million years. That's how I know him. Mm-hmm. And I now know people just because they smoke. And so the same way that I know the people who are gay, like this famous scientist, I know the people who smoke. Some of them are your kids. Because they're always saying to me, don't tell my father I smoke.
What was if any, was there any crossover between disco dancing, which you told me you like to do, and the ballet?
Yes. I mean, the crossover just was that, we went dancing all the time. I mean, it was like almost like it was a craze.
Mm-hmm.
Like I loved to dance so much when I was young, and I was a very good dancer, not a good ballet dancer, but and a lot of these places, most of these places were illegal where we dance, because you need licenses and all this kind of stuff, which they didn't have. Yeah, you would see a lot of the same people. I mean, we didn't, see like Ellsworth Kelly. I never saw him like dancing at 12 West. I mean, doesn't mean he was never there. I don't know, but I mean, it was mostly, people who were young who were, dancing. I mean, I know people who are young dance now. I mean, I still am an excellent dancer, but I would never dance in public now because I just remember what it was like if I would see someone like older dancing. I would think, what? Why would you be dancing? You're 35. I mean, the whole, the hatred, by the way, of straight people had for disco music, I mean, straight artists especially, the straight artists, were so contemptuous of disco music. And I remember I had a girlfriend who had just been the girlfriend of a straight male artist and was still like parroting what he said instead of what I said that came later. And she said something like how, horrible disco was, which was what they used to say. And I said, first of all, you're wrong. I said, because disco music is black music. Okay? Black music is never not good. Okay? Period. Okay? And so this guy, who's now, of course, quite well-known artist, is wrong. And here are the people who are least likely to know what is good popular music. Straight white guys. Who cares what they think? I mean, really, about anything.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you, Fran.
Thank you.
Maybe. Does anyone have any questions? There's a microphone being passed around for anyone who...
Will you tell us about Stonewall?
Will I tell you about Stonewall? That's a funny question. But you mean the truth about Stonewall? The truth about Stonewall. The truth. No one wants to hear this, okay? I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with thinking what people think about Stonewall, but it just is not what happened, okay? It was not a riot because it lasted for a few days, by the way. I lived right near there at the time. Riots don't stop so that people can sleep till 2 o'clock the next afternoon, okay? Riots, real riots, by the way, are horrible. They burn down buildings, people die. This wasn't a riot. This was some angry drag queens throwing bottles at the cops. That's what Stonewall was. I mean, the initial thing that happened with Stonewall was that, which I'm certain by now people have taken note of this, it happened to be the day of Judy Garland's funeral. People were very distraught about this. Not me, but other people. It was also 1 million degrees. I mean, it was a summer. It was really hot. It was horrible. No one had air conditioning, by which I mean I didn't. And nobody I knew had it. People forget how horrible the summer used to be without air conditioning. I mean, I'm sure there are people without air conditioning now. It's horrible. And this bar, the Stonewall, was mostly a drag queen bar. Not only, but mostly. And it was not like packed with people. The cops... All gay bars were illegal. 100% of gay bars were illegal because it was illegal to be gay. Hence, the bars were illegal. Yet there were, of course, many, many gay bars in New York. So obviously, the cops had to be paid off because they were bars. People saw them, and so I'm pretty sure what happened with Stonewall was that the cops came in to get paid off, but they had been paid already. Okay, and so it was like a mistake, a clerical error, right? Which that. Like 2 other cops from the 6th Precinct had already been there, gotten their money. These cops didn't know about it, or they said they didn't know about it. The mafia owned all the bars. You know, I mean, they owned all the gay bars because who else could own something illegal like that? And that's why gay bars were horrible. I mean, they were horrible. I hardly ever went in my life to gay bars. They were horrible. Drinks were 5 times more expensive than any other place. People were treated very badly, and it's because this is it. You want to go to a gay bar? This is it. You know, yes, maybe at the regular bar down the street, a drink is $2. Here, it's $9. And it's a worse drink. So that also the police had these kind of trucks that were black. We called them Black Mariahs. And when they would arrest people, like in a bunch of people, which they would do with hookers or in gay bars, they would pull up with this truck and like put everyone in the back of this black police truck, which said police on the side of it. When they raided gay bars in New York, which they did periodically, the same way that periodically they arrested hookers in the street. This was always done at the behest of a politician, you know, who was like showing you he's cleaning up New York. You know, even though, you know, there were these, you know, sporadic attempts to clean up New York, even though no one really wanted New York to be cleaned up. I don't know who the audience was for the cleaning up of New York. The people who wanted New York to be cleaned up weren't in New York. The people in New York wanted the hookers and the bars, you know. That's why we were in New York. So they came and they, when they would raid a gay bar, they would arrest everybody in the bar. And the next day, everybody's name would be in the newspaper. And that day, everybody would be fired from their job. And not just like a tabloid newspaper, but also the New York Times, you know, which was not always this beacon of, you know, gay freedom that it is today. And every single person's name would be in the newspaper. And no matter what your job was, you know, if you sold shoes at Bloomingdale's or you were a doctor at Mount Sinai Hospital, you were fired. And many of these men were married. So then also your marriage would end. And so people were very terrified to be arrested in a gay bar. It wasn't so much the arrest as it was what happened because of the arrest. So they raided the bar, and I don't think that there were a lot of doctors from Mount Sinai at the Stonewall. It was really basically, as I said, a drag queen bar. And they came in and they started arresting people, bringing them into this police truck, and someone threw a bottle. I mean, one of the people in the bar threw a bottle at the cops. And, you know, this street erupted. It was really hot out. You know, it was late, you know, at night. And when I say we, I mean people my age, we hated cops. It was just the one thing that brought all the people of the same generation together was the hatred of cops. The New York City police were hated by everyone in New York who was like, you know, 19 or 20 years old. A lot of it had to do with the arresting of people at anti-war protests. That was a lot of the hatred. Also, New York City had just started this thing called the Tactical Police Force. And it was pretty new. It was a pretty new thing. And it was cops who dressed like, I don't know, knights with shining. I mean, they had like armor, body armor, and shields. You know, like you saw more in Paris than you saw here. And so these cops were particularly hated. Also, the Village Voice, the office of the Village Voice, was right near there. So there was like people ready to report on it, and there was Fred McDowell, the photographer, to take pictures of it. And so it looked like a big thing, but it wasn't a big thing, by which I mean it wasn't that many people. You know, and it wasn't like, you know, we are sick of being oppressed, and it wasn't like that. It was like, I am a drunk, angry drag queen, you know, and Judy Garland died, you know, and isn't that enough for one day? You know? So there was this eruption, and the fact that, you know, the Village Voice was next door, and so there was a photograph of this, you know, and then like then it stopped, because then it was day, and daytime is for sleeping. So everyone went to sleep, you know, and then the next night, like, someone tried to, like, you know, boil it up again, which was easy to do, because it was also a form of entertainment. And there was a group called the Young Lords. The Young Lords were a Puerto Rican, activist group, liberation group, completely, based on the Black Panthers. The Young Lords, let me assure you, were not sympathetic to gay rights. The young lords were these very macho guys, the young lords. They were like a street gang, except that they were street gang with, politics, with the liberation of Puerto Rican people. So the young lords were not marching in favor of drag queens, believe me. Okay, you've been unlucky enough, drag queen, to run into the young lords, you would have been beaten to death. So this is a myth, and even in some of those pictures in the Village Voice, I think there were the young lords. But they showed it as if the young lords were marching in solidarity. But they weren't. They were marching against the cops. Right? So this lasted like 2 or 3 nights with time out in the daytime to sleep. And, for quite a while I would say to people, this isn't really the way it happened. And there's a wonderful, fantastic writer named James McCourt. And Jimmy McCourt wrote a book, must be now, like 10 years ago, called Queer Street. It's his only book of nonfiction. And Jimmy McCourt is even older than me. And in this book, he writes about Stonewall in the usual way that's written about. And I called him up and I said, Jimmy, this isn't true. This isn't true. And he said, Fran, every people needs their myths. So, Jimmy McCourt, he's not even as nice as I am. So if Jimmy McCourt thinks that, I guess it's helpful, but it's not true. How often those two things go hand in hand?
Hi. Given how much New York has changed over the years, if you were 18 today, do you think that you would move here?
He said, given how much New York has changed over the years, if I was 18 now, do I think I would live here? Absolutely not. I could never afford to. I couldn't even afford to not afford to. In other words, I could never afford to live here, and I still can't. Truthfully, who can afford to live in New York? Really, no one. As far as I could tell. It must be no one, because even though we have a lot of billionaires in New York, many of these billionaires are still doing whatever it is that made them billionaires. So it must be because they think, well, I have to live in New York. I only have $2 billion. How can I afford it? So, so that the level at which I couldn't afford New York was different than now, okay? So I don't think I would have. Because it would have been, I wouldn't be able to live inside. Which has always been my goal, okay? And remains my goal. And becomes a goal that recedes in the distance, as these prices go higher and higher and higher. So, I came to New York with $200, that my father gave me. And I lived out inside the whole time. You couldn't do that now. I don't care how inventive you are or how adorable, which is also how you could also live inside. I think it would be impossible to do. Also, I had very low standards. In other words, for how I lived. We lived in horrible places. Disgusting. And I didn't really care. I did not care then when I was young. Now all people seem to care more about their physical circumstances, their domestic environment, than cared about it when I was young. And people who are young, a lot of people who are young now seem to me to be middle-aged. Even though they're much younger than me. What I mean is that, many, many times, people in their 20s have said to me, Fran, what restaurants did you go to when you were my age? I thought, none. I don't even remember eating. We must have eaten because I'm alive. But I don't remember eating. And I think, restaurants, food, those are the pleasures of middle age. Don't waste your time on that in your 20s. Be more promiscuous. You can always eat. You're still going to want to eat when you're 40. You're still going to want to eat when you're 50. The rest of it, not as much. So I really would suggest you stop worrying about where the best sushi is. Really, it shouldn't matter when you're that age. You have to give yourself something to look forward to when you're old. Okay, and food is one of the things. So I don't think that I would have. The thing is, it is impossible when people say, if you were 18, what would you do now? If I was 18 now, I would not be me. You know, it's like when people say, you know, if you were rich, you know, what would you do? Like someone said to me, it's a friend of mine called me once and said, did you see such and such a house in the New York Times today? And I said, yes, there were pictures and an article about it. Did you like it? I said, it looked nice. She said, were you ever in it? Because it was owned by someone that we know. I said, no. She said, would you buy it? And I said, it's $27 million. Because they had the price. And this is a rich person who said this to me. So she said, yes, because I'm thinking of looking at it. She said, so what I'm asking you is, if you had $27 million, would you buy it? And I said, if I had $27 million, I wouldn't be me. I'd be you. No, if you want to buy it, which she did.
Do you have a cigarette?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a cigarette?
Do I have a cigarette?
Yeah.
I do. I have more than one. You can't smoke them here. Isn't that ridiculous? Yeah. I mean, I just want to say one thing about not smoking in museums, okay? You know, you used to be able to smoke in museums at parties, like when they were closed to the public. You could smoke in museums. Yes, you could smoke in the Met, okay? Which has really good pictures in there. You can smoke in museums. Now you cannot, I mean, not when they were open, you know, but you can smoke at the restaurants and museums. Now you cannot smoke in museums. If you would say to people, and not just where you cannot smoke inside, anywhere. I was in someone's house in Malibu. I mean, it was kind of a house. It was kind of someone. And the whole back of the house, which was on the beach, facing the beach, literally practically in the Pacific Ocean, it was open. I mean, literally open. It had some kind of glass doors that were open completely, so it was really like being outside. And standing near this, you know, wind is coming in from the Pacific Ocean. I lit a cigarette, I'm talking to someone, and the owner of the house came over and said, you can't smoke in here, Fran. And I said, really? Why? I mean, it was open, it was like wind rushing in, the surf practically in the house. He said, because of the art. So I looked like this, and there was a lot of Hockneys there. So I said, really? I said, first of all, you know that when David was painting these, when he was 1 inch from them, there was a cigarette in his mouth. You know that, right? You know that this painting is half tobacco. That you have never seen a Picasso, a picture of Picasso without a cigarette in his mouth. You've never seen one. Okay? So you don't have any Picassos, but if you did, they would be even more filled with cigarette smoke than the Hockneys. So you buy the cigarette smoke, but you won't let any more cigarette smoke waft over it. So yes, I have a cigarette, but you can't smoke it.
So,
I mean, cigarettes are the only things ever in the history of the world that I can think of that are legal to buy, but not to use.
so is it time for a cigarette, Fran?
I'm sorry?
Is it time for, I think maybe
It's
everyone
time for
needs a cigarette.
Yes, she probably wants to have a cigarette. So thank you very much. Bye.